let's head down to SoCal. Murat was in the building last night and joins us now from The Athletic. It seems like Mark Scheifele is far from 100%. He hasn't been taking faceoffs. I mean, you were there last night. What did you see from Scheifele, and what do you make of him being in the lineup right now, but seemingly far from at the top of his game?
Yeah, I mean, specifically last night, that line got outshot badly, right? I mean, every Winnipeg Jets line did. So um, I'm not going to end up, criticizing any individual over the group, but I will criticize many of the individuals because it wasn't there, right? It wasn't a good game. So that line gets outshot 6-1. That's obviously not acceptable for a top line. Scheifele finishes the night with no shots on goal. Didn't look like a threat to create. And for a guy with 26 points in 23 games, you expect him to be able to find at least some moments. So is he, battling injury? There's some pretty compelling reasons to think that he is. In the 5 games since that fight with Aaron Ekblad in Florida, in the 5 games since then, he's taken only 18 faceoffs total. In 11 out of 17, so solid amount over half of the games he played before that, he took more than that in a single night. So it's taken him 5 games to get up to the faceoff total that he typically do in a night. Something's off there. And it's not just that he's deferring to Gabriel Vilardi, who is over 60% in the faceoff circle. This might be something Winnipeg actually discovers that it likes because he's having so much success. But when Vilardi hasn't been an option, Scheifele's deferred to Kyle Connor to take faceoffs. The other night in Minnesota, Winnipeg gives up a goal against specifically because, in my mind, he defers to Nikolai Ehlers, who takes the draw, loses it cleanly. Nobody gets in a position, and then the Wild score before everybody's set. There are some compelling reasons to think that he's battling something. It looks upper body to me. There are some moments of awkward body posturing and things like that, but obviously you can't diagnose from 200 feet away in a box and through all of that. If you asked me to pick a lane, though, I think that he's battling something, and it's not looked good for a couple games here.
I really do wonder, and I mean, I will throw this theory out. I was talking about it with some friends last night, and I do wonder if this was a normal year and there was no Four Nations Cup and they weren't announcing the team next week, and we know how important this opportunity, I believe, is to Mark, and to prove that he belongs with the best in Canada, to play against the best in the NHL. With the cushion that they've given themselves, where they are in the standings right now, I do wonder if in late November you'd have a star player playing through something, if there was an incredible personal drive to be out there to do everything they can to make sure they hear their name called next Wednesday.
I think that's fair, right? I mean, the rosters are due Monday, I think, first for announcement on Wednesday. Do I have that right, Huss? Like, that's what I think is happening.
I think that makes sense. Yeah, I think we were talking that game on Thursday night at home against St. Louis before they're announced on Wednesday is sort of after they've already kind of submitted it and putting it all together.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense. So this is the last drive. This is the stretch run for his audition. I mean, geez, we're not doctors. We don't know the nature of this. Maybe he's just struggling and he's not taking faceoffs for a reason that has nothing to do with an injury. And I don't believe that, but we can't know, I don't think, without anybody saying exactly what's going on. That said, I wouldn't like that so much. I wouldn't, I'd understand the desire to audition, but Scheifele's already at the point where with 26 points in 23 games, he's 9th among Canadian forwards in points to start the season. If he has to take a night off, in my mind, does his resume get hurt for a tournament that's going to be taking place in February? And in my mind, no. But maybe for the powers that be, they want to see a consistent stretch. Maybe it's a pride thing. Maybe he'd do it even if there was no Four Nations Cup. But with this kind of deadline coming up, it's easy to imagine, at least, that there's an added incentive there for a guy. I mean, that's talked about the importance of these tournaments before. I think the 2017 Worlds is the last one he was in. I think he got 8 points in 10 games during that. Like, he's been all in when he has worn the maple leaf. So, I mean, it's a compelling story. And if all of a sudden we see, hey, Scheifele's taking a night off next week or misses a couple extra practices to start December or something to that effect, then I think a lot of us will sort of just believe that our assumptions are right, and there might not be a whole lot to challenge that.
I will say, be careful what you wish for. It'd be great to get him back to 100%, and if that means being out of the lineup, so be it. However, it did get me thinking about what this team looks like without Mark Scheifele in the lineup, and I'm sure David Gustafson would be more than happy to jump in and play a role on any of the lines right now, but, especially, with how good the 3rd and 4th line have been, you probably don't wanna mix that up, but, there's not a lot. I mean, this team needs Mark Scheifele and relies on him big time, and when he is off and probably not at 100%, it notices it, and it really puts a lot of pressure on Connor Hellebuck and the guys in the bottom 6.
Yeah, we've seen this, like, it's a playoff story we've seen quite often too, whether he's been injured or that one year where the suspension took him out of the Montreal series. You can complain about this or that aspect of his game all you want. You remove Mark Scheifele from the lineup and you're missing a number one center. And he doesn't need to be the literal best number one center in the world for that to be an enormous loss. And we've seen it. We've seen the Jets struggle without him. He hasn't had a perfect bill of health, though he's largely been healthy throughout his career. And the depth isn't there, even with him in the lineup, right? Where I think a lot of us expect there to be at least some poking around a second line center upgrade heading into the trade deadline. And the Jets did it last year with the same lineup, right? They went out and got Sean Monahan. They've done it in the past. Like, that is an area that the team probably wants to bolster even with him there. You take him out, and I mean, certainly I guess that makes Gabriel Velarde your number one center, and that's fine. But now you've got to bump somebody else up. And is that Ehlers on that top line? And then what's happening to the Nemesnikov line? Does anybody get that puck moving up the ice? Like, there are so many problems that arise if you remove that puzzle piece. So, I mean, for a game or two here or there with the record they have, probably they've bought themselves some runway. But if you're looking at that as, if this were a situation where it was the stretch run or playoffs, it would be a pretty gaping hole.
The second line has been, not as impactful, I would say, as certainly the guys in the bottom 6 the last few games. And it's one thing not to score on your opportunities, although they did have a few. I mean, Perfetti rang that one off the post, but we saw him switch with Alex Iafallo at one point last night. The one thing that I hated last night from a Jets perspective was that second goal, in that sort of a flyby by Nikolai Ehlers and Cole Perfetti a step behind and not really that engaged. And, they sort of just left it on a platter there for Philip Deneau to bang that one in. I wonder about, those players, but especially Perfetti, because it seemed like, he hasn't had a lot of luck recently offensively. It's been a long time since he scored. And then he saw himself taken off that line at a time last night for Alex Iafallo, who's been really running hot for the Jets.
Yeah, that goal against was not good. It absolutely wasn't, right? The play coming out of the corner to Dano in front, and he's almost all alone, except he's not. Nikolai Ehlers is there, and he's a quick player, and he makes a flyby on that attempt. So from there, if you're Cole Perfetti looking at that and you're a step behind that play, you might not expect the rebound to be a play you have to worry about, because you might expect Ehlers to stop on it. He doesn't. And Perfetti, whether it was that was the decision he made or he was just slow to make the read or any of that sort of stuff, Dano doesn't score on his first shot. He scores on a rebound again alone. And you have Ehlers and Perfetti, divide the blame how you want, but they're also in picture on a play where Dano is making things happen and scoring that important goal. That's not a good look. You don't want that from anybody on your team, and certainly not from those two players who are counted on as they're important secondary scorers on the Jets, and they need to keep a responsible defensive zone too. That was not it. Elsewhere in the game, the swap itself for me is a coach trying to get things going. Iafallo's coming off of a 2-goal performance against Minnesota, and really nice goals at that, right? Like, the backhand as he's falling was a pretty special thing. You had probably some of the best players for the Jets last night on an overall poor performance from so many players were probably Velarde, Kupari, and you could think of Iafallo in that group as well. So maybe you're playing the Kings counter gambit sort of play in that one. maybe it's just the idea that IFL is a hot hand or a veteran that they've done that move with before. It could just be that. At the same time, for me, I don't think Winnipeg's issues last night were a 1 or 2 player problem. I don't think anybody was looking at that flip flop and thinking, hey, this is going to turn the tide in the game. So it is what it is to that regard. In that game, though, as well, it's tough. Like, Cole Perfetti is slumping. No bones about that. 6 points in 13 November games. That's not great. There are moments where he creates, right? He's the one who sent Kupari in for that breakaway that led to the penalty shot. He jumps in and picks up a pass from Nemesnikov and rings that one off the iron. There are moments, right? This is a good hockey player. This is a player who's still on pace for 50-plus points this season, even with this slump. He still has the 9th most points in his draft class, despite playing fewer games than the competition in that regard. This is a 22-year-old work in progress who is a good secondary scorer. And there were plays that died on his stick last night, and there were moments of indecision, and there were moments where I thought he was trying to do a little bit too much instead of getting the puck onto his stick and off of his stick, where it just didn't look good. And I think it's a player that's going to be out of his slump, a week, 2 weeks from now. I don't think he's going to be an issue moving forward. I really believe in him as that sort of top 6 scorer with some power play ability on this team. It's just not happening for him right now. And I wouldn't single him out the way that it seems to have happened with that line swap and the online dialogue. But I'm not going to go ahead and defend that he's been great, because between that one big defensive play and some of the other wobbles, it wasn't enough for me to cancel. Like, the crossbar doesn't cancel all that out to me.
Yeah, listen, he had plenty of company, but I will say, particularly for 91 and 27, that's going to be a tough video session when they run through that second goal last night, and when they finally get to practice and probably do some video work heading into Vegas. On a positive note, I thought Ville Heinola played with a lot of confidence last night. I really liked his first couple games. I mean, what have you made of his first 120 minutes back in the National Hockey League after almost 2 years away?
Ville Heinola had no right to be one of the best Jets on the ice last night. Absolutely no right. To go 2 months not playing, 2 quick conditioning stint games for the Moose with awkward schedules at that, hop on a plane, join the Jets on this trip, playing his first NHL games in ages, and coming off of foot surgery, coming off of last year's injury, and then the AHL season that followed it. There is no reason why he should have been one of the most dynamic Jets last night, but he was. He absolutely was. You can look at the hard defensive plays he's not supposed to make. There was a rush chance for the Kings where they're playing it to Anze Kopitar in the middle. Well, Heinola leaned on him hard enough that Kopitar couldn't get a shot off. I don't know if he got a stick all the way tied up, but Kopitar couldn't get engaged to take the shot. So that was there. He was making quick release passes to Colin Miller, and then jumping up into the play, jumping up ice and becoming an option. In the third period, the Jets only had 2 shots, but some of the shot attempts that didn't quite get credited, I think, came off of Ville Heinola's stick, where he was still looking to create. There's a moment where Colin Miller fell in the third, and Heinola dives back and gets a stick on what could be a 2-on-0 sort of mini break in front of Connor Hellebuck. There were so many wobbly moments for so many Jets last night, and maybe that just points to the exhaustion of the trip they've been on and all that sort of stuff. But Ville Heinola wasn't particularly one of them. And I don't know if you remember this, but a week ago I was on your show and I'm like, this game is rigged. He is not going to be able to have a strong start based off of all that he's gone through. For me, so far, so good. I think he's your ready-made third-pairing defenseman with Colin Miller, even when Samberg is healthy.
I'm with you. I've really liked what he's done, and especially he did stand out. Now, again, the bar was somewhat low compared to the rest of his teammates last night, but at the same point, I mean, we weren't ever talking about, oh man, that's a tough play. I mean, he got hit a couple hard. He didn't win every single puck battle. No one does. But I mean, I had been preaching a little bit of patience and give this young man 5-6 games, and then we'll kind of see where he's at. I don't think he could have hoped for a better start right now so far. And I do think we were seeing more and more confidence from the coaching staff moving forward. A practice day today, and then a game tomorrow. It is a 5:30 game in Vegas, which means a kind of a normal 7:30 start, which is nice for us here in the Central Time Zone. What are you going to be looking for tomorrow when this team gets back onto the ice in the midst of, as you pointed out on Twitter last night, going back to the preseason, Scott Arniel knowing that this was one of the most challenging points, if not the most challenging portion of their entire schedule?
Yeah, it's something that he's had circled on his calendar. I sat down with him in his office or an office at the Iceplex during camp, and I wrote off of that. But the section of the season, the entire season that he singled out at that moment was this stretch that they're on. So, like I said on Twitter and Blue Sky and all of the places, I think that we should, if we've been talking about how difficult this trip is going to be and they've known this for so long, we should offer some grace and some understanding about how tough it is. And maybe it's, I don't know if it's okay, but it's certainly reasonable for there to be some really tough nights, while being honest that there were tough nights. And for me, Winnipeg didn't have it from the get last night in Los Angeles. And for me, the thing that I want to see them do against Vegas that demonstrates a step forward, this is going to be a really soft, low bar to clear, but chain a couple of breakout passes together. I mean, the amount of mishandled tape to tape attempts to start that game yesterday was not up to Winnipeg Jets NHL quality. It just wasn't. And there were so many wobbles, and you can go from tip to toe of that lineup. I mean, there were mishandles. I mean, Perfetti, who we talked about earlier, one of the rim pucks in the offensive zone is stuck in my mind. Most, I'm going to say 5 out of 6 defensemen. There was a case of, was it Neil Pionk or Dylan DeMello or both, who just kind of fell over at times. Mark Scheifele was having a tough time staying on his feet. Like, it was a wobbly start to that game. And all I want to see is the Jets, if they play their own game, which means tape to tape passes, which means a little bit more crispness, which means receiving those passes and making plays. If they're going to get beat by the Vegas Golden Knights tomorrow, I hope it's because the Vegas Golden Knights beat them, and not because they just couldn't find their legs or their passing. They looked so disconnected to me. That's got to stop.
Well, I would imagine that Vegas will have the day off and they'll all be having a turkey day with their families. The Jets were practicing. We've seen some ugly games on Black Friday in Winnipeg Jet history. Crossing our fingers that it won't be one of those, and the team will bounce back like they have so far this year. Murat's got a great piece at The Athletic right now, kind of looking at the Jet season at the quarter point. What I think, what I know. I'll let you all read that. It is a great long read, a bunch of stuff. But just before we go, Murat, I wanted to ask you about one of the topics that you cover, and that is Scott Arniel, his effect on this team, and the performance of the head coach through the 22-23 game mark as we go into the Thanksgiving weekend.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of lenses to go through, and I mean, you can start with the 18-5 record. I think that's beyond a lot of Jets fans' wildest dreams in the offseason. I mean, it's pretty good for running it back, isn't it? Right? Like,
I'll say.
so there's that. I think coaching has the most disproportionate impact on special teams. So, I mean, it's obviously a team effort coaching wise. Winnipeg's power play, that's a Davis Payne focus area. You could give that as one of the number one reasons for team success. Penalty kill obviously needs a lot of work. They got cleaned up even instantly with that Kopitar goal yesterday. That's still a work in progress. But overall, there's that. The fact that the 5-on-5 structure has mostly been there, also another credit. But I think the area that I zoom into in the piece, or at least feel like it's important to acknowledge, we've sort of talked about line combinations, right? And early in the season, that Connor, Scheifele, and Velarde, they just weren't going. They were getting outshot. They were getting outscored. They were worthy of the criticism they got. Same with that Nemestikov line, and then they eventually turned it on. Well, Scott Arniel had a delicate line to walk there. He wants to keep his stars bought in, and there is some real preference on behalf of the players for Scheifele and Connor and Velarde to play together. They like that. So there's a little bit of management to do there. But he also has to assert himself as the head coach. And so there have been several games where in the midst of the game for a few shifts, he sort of pulled that lever of, okay, now Nikolai Ehlers is going to take Velarde's spot, or Nikolai Ehlers is going to take Kyle Connor's spot, which has happened. They've mixed that up and then gone back to the original group. And I think it's important for the head coach to be able to say in moments, this is not good enough. You're being held accountable to this. We have other options, while also managing sort of his most important players and stars and what have you in that regard. And I think look at the record and all that sort of stuff, and look at the games that they pulled out, or especially early on. It's hard to argue with the results. That Connor Scheifele Velarde line has outscored its opposition for the last several games as well as a general rule. So he's landed on results that previous coaches tried and failed and couldn't quite get. So it seems as though the levers are all being pulled correctly. Again, last night that shuffle was never going to fix that game. But that delicate tightrope of needing to assert in some ways without rocking the boat too hard, I think he's right, I guess, in the pocket with that right now.